boys, so here we are with a poem after Blenheim. Alright, so I will give you an explanation stanza wise. So you can open up your book and to the poem, and you can follow it as I'm reading it and as I'm explaining it to you. So stanza 1. After Blenheim by Robert Southey. It was a summer evening, old Caspar's work was done, and he before his cottage door was sitting in the sun. And by him spotted on the green, his little grandchild Wilhelmine. So this particular stanza, it is talking about a setting, okay? It is a perfect summer evening, and after which old Caspar has already finished his work, alright, his day's work, and he is seen sitting on the front door of his little cottage, and beside him are his little grandchildren who are playing. And here the mention of his grandchild who is a little, okay, so here his name is Wilhelmine, okay? So that is the granddaughter Wilhelmine. So stanza 2. She saw her brother Peterkin roll something large and round, which he besides the rivulet in plain there had found. He came to ask what he had found that was so large and smooth and round. So here in this particular stanza, Wilhelmine sees her brother play with something large and round that he had found in the rivulet. Rivulet is a small river, okay? River, you know what a river looks like, but it's just a small stream of water is known as a rivulet. It is not so big as a river. So that is like you can find a rivulet even in the middle of a forest, okay? A small rivulet. So that is where he finds Peterkin finds something that is large and round, and he's playing with it. So he came to his grandfather to ask what it was, and so large, that looked so large, round and smooth. So that is what he is playing with. So stanza 3. Old Caspar took it from the boy who stood expectant by, and then the old man shook his head, and with a natural sigh, "'Tis some poor fellow's skull," said he, "who fell in the great victory." So now here, old Caspar, he takes this large round thing from his grandson and tells him, okay, and then he sighs. He says, "Oof," and then he sighs. But then this is something that he usually finds it when he is plowing in the field, okay. And now the child has found it, and so like when he looks at it, he sighs and says, "Oh, this is some poor fellow's skull who died in the Great War." The child stood by all along in great eagerness to know what it was. So he wanted to know what it was. Stanza 4. I find them in the garden, for there's many year about, and often when I go to plough, the ploughshare turns them out. For many thousand men, said he, were slain in the great victory. So here, old Caspar now tells the child, okay, he says, this is something that we often find such skulls in the field, when we are plowing the field. And there they were often, out on the plowshare. For many such thousands had lost their lives in the great victory. So it was like an open graveyard during the time when this battle was fought. There were so many people who actually died in, the soldiers that who lost their lives in this particular war, that it looked like an open grave. It looked like an open grave. And so this was a very, it was a macabre, it was a very bad sight actually, but to say, you wouldn't want to see, dead bodies of people like just lying around like that. But then that particular place where they were finding now, after years later, after the battle, when they were finding the skulls, that particular place was an open grave for people who were dying in the battle. So, stanza 4. I find them in the garden, for there's many hereabouts. Okay? And so yeah, that is particular stanza that he tells that he finds them in the plowshare, that he finds them in the field. Stanza 5. Now tell us what 'tis all about, young Peterkin, he cries, and little Wilhelmine looks up with wonder-waiting eyes. Now tell us all about the war and what they fought each other for. Now the children want to know what this battle was that they were finding. Every day they were finding skulls like that, and so like it was something that was not a normal sight. Okay, so they wanted to know what this battle was all about, where people were losing their life and when they were finding skulls years after the battle. And then it says, okay, their curiosity was aroused. So the two children were asking the old man, and they were curious to know what was fought and like what led to this ferocious thing that was happening. Their eyes were filled with wonder. Stanza 6. It was the English, Caspar cried, who put the French to rout. But what they fought each other for, it could not well make out. But everybody said, quoth he, that 'twas a famous victory. So here, he finally tells the children that it was the English. Okay, the English overthrew the French. Routed means they were successful over the French, that they defeated the French. The English had thrown out the French, but Caspar did not know the cause. He was not able to tell the children what the cause of the war was. So, but then he could only tell that there was a big loss of life, okay, explaining the cause behind the battle. He remembers people saying that it was a famous victory. The only thing that he remembers people saying is that it was a big victory. Stanza 7. My father lived at Blenheim then, yon little stream hard by. They burnt his dwelling to the ground, and he was forced to fly. So with his wife and child he fled, nor had he where to rest his head. So now this is actually the outcome of war that we talk about. The war isn't necessary. It is not necessary. Sorry, it is not necessary. It's an evil, because the ones who die instantly. For example, the soldiers die instantly. But there are many other innocent people who lose their lives too, alright? Besides the soldiers, there are other innocent people who lose their life too. Especially the people who live around in that vicinity, in that neighborhood. So for this, he gives an example of his own father. He says, my father, when during the war, during the battle, my father also had to run away, from his dwelling. Dwelling means home. He had to run away with a child and his wife. And why? Because they burned. People burnt down their dwellings. People burned down their house, so they didn't have any place to rest their heads. So they had to run away from there. So this is what he recalls in a very frightful experience that he explains to his little grandchildren. So his father then lived in Blenheim. Besides the little stream, they perhaps could be the British soldiers that must have driven them, that must have chased them from there, who must have chased them from there. So, and also burnt his house. Every bit of it was burnt, and they were forced to leave the place. So having no other option, he had to leave with his wife and child, even though he had no refuge to seek, not a place to rest his head. So this is what he recalls, and he gives an example of, people, suffering in the war. It's not only just the soldiers who suffer during the war, but it's also the local people, and especially the innocent ones. So, stanza 8. With fire and sword the country round was wasted far and wide, and many a childing mother then and newborn baby died. But things like that, must be at every famous victory. So he says this with a lot of, you can say he's saying this, he's giving accounts of these battles with a lot of. It isn't passion that he is speaking with, but he is speaking these things with something like air of acknowledgement, like saying like, this thing should happen, this usually happens when such battle happens. And so there is a sense of acknowledgement, there is a sense of a hopelessness, hopelessness around things that is happening around you, but you have no grip of the situation. And so he also says that, see, these things should happen in a battle, because no one can do anything at any point of time, especially when such battle happens. One person cannot stand up and say that this is wrong, so you have to suffer. So he says this with a little sense of hopelessness and a lot of sense of acknowledgement, because he knows what a person has to go through if such things happen. So there was a terrible fight, he says. The soldiers chased the people with the sword and fire, and there were signs of destruction all around the country. Many newborn baby here, and many a childing mother then. That means many newborn baby, where the mother had just given birth to new children, had just given birth, even they, So you will see that the victims of war, like in most sense, the ones who are most hit, of course, men fall in the war, soldiers, like there are man falls in a war battle, but then it is usually the innocent ones, more innocent ones, that is the children, and the weaker section of the society, who happens to be the female, the woman. They are the ones who suffer the most, actually. So that is what has been portrayed even in the poem here. So here you can see the sense of hopelessness and the sense of the pathetic situation that they were in. They had to carry their newborn children, and they had to go around. They had to run away from there. They didn't even know where they were supposed to go, and that was a very hopeless situation for everybody. So even for a mother with a new child. So every war is known for the disaster, so plunder, destruction and devastation that it causes, Casper says, So this is now stanza 9. They say it was a shocking sight after the field was won, for many thousand bodies here lay rotting in the sun. But things like that, must be after a famous victory. So he says this with a lot of acknowledgement, as I told you, like, see, this is supposed to happen in a battle, and that is a very gruesome sight, to see thousands of bodies just lying in the open like that. It looks like an open graveyard. So according to the people, the after-war scenario was a shocking sight. In the Battle of Blenheim, after the battle, people actually said that the particular scene was a very shocking sight, because thousands of dead people, they were like just rotting in the sun. They were not cremated, they were not buried, and it was just lying out in the open, which according to many is a familiar sight after a famous victory. The field littered with corpses was common in any victorious war. So we come to a question, like, there are certain questions that should pop up to your mind when you're reading such poems and when you're reading such lyrics, is there anybody who actually cares? Because it is because of one single man's, as I've already told you, it's because of one single man's ambition, growing ambition, ego, and greed, that he compromises the life of many people around him. So the leaders, the ones who get all this necessary, you can say, adulation and all this people receiving them around in the public. So the adulation that they get after the war, they get the adulation, but who is going to cry? cry for the victims who have fallen in the war and what is going to happen to them, because we're not just talking about one family, two families, okay, we're talking about thousands and thousands of family, and who is responsible for all this? Or should we always, should we always be, think that these leaders are always thinking about us? Do you think the leaders are actually thinking about us? Or so, like, you can say, like, do they even know that we exist? Okay, so that's the question. So for them, we common people are just faceless. We have no face. We have no face, and they do not know us. They do not even know that we exist. So anyway, so all these people who died are all the faceless people who actually fell in the glorious victory that helped to make that particular battle a glorious one. So anyway, stanza 10. Great praise the Duke of Marlborough won, and our good Prince Eugene. Why, 'twas a very wicked thing, said little Blenheim. Nay, 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 my little girl, quoth he, it was a famous victory. So see how the grandfather is telling the child. The child knows that war is evil. She says, why? After the battle, there were so many people who died. But why do they come and praise? Why was there a certain adulation for the Duke of Marlborough or for Prince Eugene? Prince Eugene was the Prince of Savoy. Okay, so they were allied. They were an allied troops. They worked in. They were in friendly terms to rout out the French. So here, the Duke of Marlborough belonged to England. Okay, so both of them they were praised a lot for this famous victory. But the famous victory was like a facade. The people who stood in the front were the Duke of Marlborough and Prince Eugene, and it was like hiding all the gruesomeness of the war. There were many people who had died in the battle. So not only soldiers, as I've already told you, even common and innocent people. So now the child knows. So that is why the child says, why, it was a very wicked thing. Blenheim says, but then the grandfather says, nay, 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 my little girl, quoth he, it was a famous victory. It was supposed to be something which was glorified. So Caspar objected to it and said that it was a famous victory. No, it wasn't evil. So now stanza 11. And everybody praised the Duke, who this great fight did win. But what good came of it at last, quoth little Peterkin. See, now this two little children, okay, the grandchildren, become the mouthpiece of the poet. They are actually saying things that the poet wants to tell the audience. Okay, so it is through the mouth of this little children that the poet speaks. So he says, and everybody praised the Duke, who this great victory win. But what good came of it at last, quoth little Peterkin. Why, that I cannot tell, said he, that is Caspar says, but that what was a great famous victory. So now he keeps repeating it, a famous victory, a famous victory. You can note and say that, you can note that down, and that's a poetic refrain. I will also be giving you notes on it, okay? Notes on it in the next class, poetic refrain, you can even write it down. So I'll be giving you notes on that. And so why does Caspar keep on saying, after everything that the little children are saying, why does Caspar always say that it was a famous victory, it was a famous victory? It is because that he knows, he is a grown-up man, he knows that nothing can be done besides just wait and watch. Okay, so that's he knows the fact that nothing can be done there but wait and watch. So anyway, so this is what the poem is all about. And so the ones who are glorified and praised are always the ones who are in the hierarchy, high in the hierarchy, are up in the hierarchy, but the lower and the common ones are the ones who die, who give so much for the country, but who are never glorified. So this particular thing, I think the two little children are more obviously, they are obviously more conscious, and they know that it is not the leaders who have to be praised and glorified, but it is the common people and the soldiers who have fallen should be glorified. They are the unsung heroes, but the people who emerges as heroes are the leaders. So this is what he detests. Okay, he hates. The poet hates, and he speaks to the mouth of these two little children and says, like, you should not say that the duke or the prince are the heroes, because they are wicked. They let the people die. So this is what happens, and Peter and Caspar, he tells them that nothing can be done. You only have to know that it was a famous victory. Okay, so thank you, boys. Thank you so much for listening, and this will be followed up with PDF notes for your class work, and which will also which is going to be sent to you on WhatsApp, which is also going to be uploaded on the website. Thank you so much for listening, and I think with this we have ended the chapter after Blenheim. So okay, so you can play it again if you have doubts. You can play the video again if you have doubts, or if you have doubts, if you want to contact us. Okay, so you can always get across through personal WhatsApp, and you can always dropping us with any kind of doubts that you might need to have cleared up. Okay, so thank you so much for listening, boys.